Hi, I'm Liz Scuff. Welcome to this little channel exploring cultural... What am I doing here? I do this almost every video. Collaborative learning for cultural repair. Okay, it's a mouthful. So in this video I wanted to talk about why I don't use the acronym BIPOC. If you're not familiar with the acronym, it stands for Black, Indigenous and People of Colour. So I've got three reasons. And the first one is about what acronyms do. So the Woolyounga Indigenous Centre, as part of the University of Wollongong here in Australia, have published a great terminology guide regarding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people in Australia. And it explains that turning people into acronyms is a form of objectification. Now, I'll link to the guide in the notes below. I think it's a really great guide. Of course, all these things like terminology, they change over time, and there's not 100% like agreement that all Indigenous people will all agree with everything in the guide. It's really, so much of this stuff around terminology and language is relational. It's personal. But there are some things that many Indigenous people will agree on, and that's partly what's in this guide, right? So I'll link it in the notes below. So today they kind of talk about that turning people into objects. So that's what their point is. And I'll say turning people into objects is a huge topic. Huge topic, which I'm not going to go into this video. But let's just say it's not actually good, it's not okay, and it's often done as a form of dominance. And it is done by settler colonial states to Indigenous people like all the time. So in Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people should never be referred to using the acronym ATSI, right? Because it is seen as a form of objectification, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are continually fighting for the right to be seen as people with a subjective experience and a culture of people, not objects for the settler colonial state to do things to. Right, so I don't use BIPOC because I think similarly it objectifies people. And again, can be in a form of dominance too, right? Because I cannot tell you the number of times that I've come across writing that uses the acronym BIPOC and then writes white people in full. It doesn't go WP, right? Now there are two-letter acronyms, they're not as common, but they exist, right? So there's no excuse. And if you're going to use acronyms, use them for everyone, but better yet, use them for no one. Second point, the acronym of course completely collapses the complexity of the cultural realities of each group within the acronym. Acronyms can just collapse complexity. That's part of the point of them, right? They're trying to make something simpler to communicate. But this sacrifice of complexity to create a unified position is sometimes a good strategic move. I get that. However, here in Australia, suggesting that the cultural realities of Indigenous people is the same as non-Indigenous people who are not racialised white, so basically everyone else who's not Indigenous and not white, it's just not okay. Because yes, both groups experience racism, and in some different and similar ways, but settler colonialism only applies to Indigenous groups, and settler colonialism isn't primarily about racism. Although it is most commonly a racialised project, it is about territory and the dispossession of peoples from place. And so grouping them all together actually is kind of like a form of erasure. So we've seen attempts here, usually innocent and unaware, to include Aboriginal and Torres Strait people under the banner of multiculturalism. And I've also seen a pushback on that because it is a form of erasure of indigeneity to consider Indigenous peoples just one of the many diverse groups, cultural groups in Australia. So it's not okay in that way as well, right, to kind of bunch them together. Third one, and you may have picked up on this already, is that the acronym BIPOC, it's not from here. It is not of us. And I think it's a form of cultural colonialism actually for us to just grab it and use it. So much of the literature we consume in Australia is about anti-racism work is from the US. As is much of our television, our news, and movies, etc. The US is a colonial project in the way it erases cultures all around the world, and there's no news there, right? But we tend to only see that in that issue in sort of mainstream content not so much in the subaltern, social change movements, but it's huge there as well. And I think we don't think critically enough about that, about the importing of social change content from the US, and particularly from the US, right? And of course, there are a lot of great thinkers and feelers from the US publishing amazing work, and I'm not suggesting we ignore it all, but I think we've got to remember that place matters. The issues of our country are unique because they are of this place. Of course, there's some things in common and things that can be useful, but if we side too much with that, it becomes a problem. I think we really have to think critically about what we do with ideas from other places if we don't want to keep replicating cultural domination, right? This idea that ideas can be hypermobile and can just be cut and paste and used here and there and everywhere just because someone has a good idea over here that, oh, we can just bring it here. I don't think so. So I think we also use these materials from other countries as a way to avoid engaging in our own country's work. We're trying to skip the hugely uncomfortable relational work by reading books from other places and then thinking we've learned something about racism that we can use here. Not saying that that's not true, but I think we have to be really careful about it, because so much of the anti-racism literature from the US is about Black African American experiences, and therefore often implicates Black voices in the settler colonial role that erases indigeneity, especially when it gets applied to, okay, these ideas and thinking and critiques about the Black African American experience can be applied to the Indigenous experience. So that's why I think we have to be especially careful of what we do with US-derived anti-racism works here. And as I said before, I think the term BIPOC is a form of erasure on multiple levels, and that's also coming from a country that I don't know why they're using it, and maybe why there's not enough being said about that. Maybe I just haven't come across it. If you have, if there is like a big hoo-ha in the US about that term, and I'd love to hear about it, please feel free to stick it in the comments. Let me know, or direct me to readings there. I'd love to learn more in that space too. Anyway, they are my 3 reasons. I'm sure there's probably a few more good ones there. Just about why I don't use the term, the acronym BIPOC. It doesn't mean sometimes I won't write it out in full to include all those groups, but I tend to also not try to put them all together, again for the same reasons I explained here, is that the issues that those different groups face are very, very different in really important ways. Obviously there's some similarities which can be really useful, and people in those groups can feel a lot of allegiance together. I'm not saying that they shouldn't, of course they should, that's great, more power to them, right? But that it erases the complexity and the differences, and assumes that racism and settler colonialism are kind of the same thing, and I think that they're just really not. Okay, that's it. I'll stop now. Okay, thanks for listening. Bye.